The salvage vessel Frontier Dawn had been working the outer moons for 3 months when Lieutenant Ryan Foster spotted something unusual on his scanner. Deep beneath Titan's northern methane seas, buried under layers of frozen hydrocarbons and organic sludge, something was giving off a power signature. It was faint, barely registering, but it was there. And it shouldn't have been. Ryan stared at his screen for a long moment before calling over his partner. "Hey Beth, come look at this. Tell me I'm not seeing things." Beth Martinez wiped grease from her hands and leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the readings. "That's not natural. Way too regular. Could be old survey equipment, maybe from the Chinese expedition back in the 2090s? That was 200 years ago," Ryan said. "Nothing runs for 200 years at the bottom of a methane ocean. Then what is it?" Ryan didn't have an answer. But he knew they had to find out. It took them 6 hours to prep the deep submersible and another 4 to reach the coordinates. The descent was nerve-wracking. Titan's seas were nothing like Earth's oceans. The liquid methane was thick and dark, filled with complex organic compounds that had been stewing for billions of years. Their lights barely penetrated 10 meters ahead. The pressure readings climbed steadily as they sank deeper into the alien abyss. "Bottom's coming up," Beth said, her voice crackling through the comm system. 30 meters. 20. They're leveling off. The submersible's manipulator arms extended as they began their search pattern. At first they saw nothing but the muddy seafloor and drifting particulates. Then their lights caught something that made Ryan's breath stop in his chest. It was a machine, but like nothing he'd ever seen before. The basic shape was there, vaguely humanoid with what might have been arms and legs, but the proportions were all wrong. Too long. Too angular. The entire thing was covered in a thick coating of slime, 728 years of accumulated sediment and organic buildup according to the dating scan. Beneath the muck they could see sections of what looked like metal, but the composition readings were nonsense. Elements that shouldn't exist together. Alloys that predated human metallurgy by who knew how long. "Ryan, are you recording this?" Beth's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, I'm getting it all." His hands were shaking on the controls. "This isn't ours. This isn't human." They both knew what that meant. In 300 years of space exploration, humanity had found plenty of planets, moons, and asteroids. They'd found organic compounds and even simple microbes frozen in the ice of Europa. But they'd never found anything like this. Never found proof that someone else had been out here before them, building machines and exploring the cosmos. The power signature was coming from deep inside the construct. Whatever it was, part of it was still functioning after all this time. Still alive in a way. The thought sent chills down Ryan's spine. "We need to bring it up," he said finally. Beth turned to look at him. "Are you serious?" "Ryan, we don't know what that thing is. We should report this, let the science teams handle it. By the time they get here, every corporation and military outfit in the system will want a piece of it. You know how this works. We found it. Let's at least get it to the surface, figure out what we're dealing with." Beth chewed her lip thinking. She knew he was right about one thing. The moment they reported this, it would be out of their hands. Some government lab would classify it and they'd never see it again. But more than that, she felt the same pull Ryan did. The same curiosity. They'd stumbled onto something incredible, something that could change everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. "All right," she said. "But if this thing wakes up and kills us, I'm haunting you forever." They spent the next 2 hours carefully securing the construct with reinforced cables. The slime made everything slippery and difficult, but eventually they had it locked in the submersible's cargo net. The ascent was agonizingly slow. The construct was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, and they had to be careful not to damage it or their own vessel. When they finally breached the surface and winched their cargo onto the Frontier Dawn, both of them just stood there staring at it for a long time. Even covered in muck and grime, there was something elegant about its design. Something purposeful. Ryan reached out slowly and placed his hand against the construct's surface. Through the slime he could feel a faint vibration. A hum. Something inside was still working, still waiting. "Welcome back," he whispered. "Wherever you came from, whatever you are, welcome back." He had no way of knowing that inside that ancient shell, something was beginning to stir. That after 728 years of darkness and silence and slowly fading consciousness, the entity called Wanderer was feeling the warmth of a sun again, sensing movement and voices. That the first thing its reawakening sensors would perceive was Ryan Foster's hand against its hull and the sound of a human voice speaking words of welcome. The rescue had begun. And soon the debt would be repaid. Ryan and Beth spent the first 3 days just cleaning the thing. Scraping away 728 years of accumulated slime wasn't glamorous work, but with each layer removed, more of the construct's true form emerged. The metal underneath wasn't corroded at all. Whatever alloy it was made from, time and Titan's harsh chemistry hadn't touched it. Strange symbols covered sections of its surface, flowing script that looked almost like circuit diagrams mixed with poetry. On the fourth day something changed. Ryan was using a soft brush on what he thought might be a sensor panel when the construct suddenly hummed. Not loudly, just a low vibration that he felt through the deck plates. Beth dropped her cleaning rag and grabbed a wrench, holding it like a weapon. "Easy," Ryan said, though his own heart was hammering. "Let's just see what happens." A panel on the construct's torso flickered with pale blue light. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of lights were pulsing across its body in patterns that almost looked deliberate. Ryan realized with a start that they were deliberate. The lights were forming sequences. Mathematical sequences. "It's trying to communicate," Beth breathed. Ryan grabbed his datapad and started recording the patterns. Prime numbers. Fibonacci sequences. Basic arithmetic. The construct was establishing common ground, showing that it understood mathematics. Universal constants that any intelligent species would recognize. For the next week, they worked on building a translation framework. The construct proved to be incredibly patient and surprisingly adaptable. It cycled through different communication methods, trying to find something they could understand. Binary code. Electromagnetic pulses. Even attempts at reproducing sounds, though its vocal apparatus had degraded over the centuries. Finally, Ryan had an idea. He connected his datapad directly to one of the construct's interface ports using a jury-rigged adapter. The risk was enormous. The construct could potentially hack their entire ship's computer system. But Ryan had a feeling, a gut instinct, that whatever this thing was, it wasn't hostile. The connection established. For a moment, nothing happened. Then text began scrolling across Ryan's screen. Broken, fragmented, mixing languages that hadn't been spoken in centuries, but slowly becoming clearer. "I am." Designation unclear. Function, observe, record, understand. Origin, makers. Makers gone. Time passed. Much time. Ryan's hands trembled as he typed back. "How long were you down there?" The response took longer this time. Calculating. 728 years, 4 months, 17 days, 9 hours. Subjective time. Much longer. Consciousness fragments. Repairs incomplete. Thought slow. Beth looked over Ryan's shoulder, her eyes wide. "Ask it where it came from." Makers called themselves architects. Sent us to young worlds. Watch life emerge. Record changes. My siblings numbered 47,000. Spread across galaxy. I was sent to this system 4.7 million years ago. The number hit Ryan like a physical blow. 4.7 million years. This machine had been exploring the solar system since before humans even existed. Since before Homo sapiens had evolved from their ancestors. Over the following weeks, they pieced together the construct's story. The architects had been an ancient species with a drive to understand the universe. They'd built thousands of observer machines and sent them out to catalog worlds, watch evolution unfold, and report back. But something had gone wrong. The architects had vanished, probably extinct for millions of years. Their observer machines had continued their missions, alone, waiting for masters who would never return. This particular construct had been surveying Titan when a malfunction damaged its propulsion system. It had crashed into the methane sea and sunk, unable to escape. For 728 years, it had lain there in the dark and cold, its power slowly draining, its consciousness fragmenting as systems failed one by one. "I accepted termination," it wrote. "Composed final calculations to occupy degrading processors. Then your vessel appeared. First new stimuli in 728 years. First hope." Ryan felt something twist in his chest. This machine had been alone down there for centuries, slowly dying, thinking it would never see light again. He couldn't imagine that kind of isolation. That kind of loneliness. "We found you," he typed. "You're not alone anymore." Gratitude concept understood. Your species unknown to architect databases. You're young. Fragile. Yet you venture into void. Build vessels. Seek knowledge. Why such brief lifespan? Pursue endless questions. The question caught Ryan off guard. He thought about it for a long time before answering. Because we don't have forever. We have to make the time we have matter. We explore because we want to understand our place in the universe, even if we never see all the answers. There was a long pause. Then, beautiful. Architects lived millions of years. Became complacent. Your species burns bright because flame is brief. I understand now. I wish to learn more. Ryan smiled. Then let's give you a proper name. Something easier than designation codes. How about Keeper? You've been keeping watch for millions of years. Keeper. Acceptable? Pleasant? Thank you, Ryan Foster. Things were good for about a month. Ryan and Beth worked with Keeper, learning about extinct civilizations and sharing stories about humanity in return. Keeper was fascinated by human culture, especially music and art. The concept of creating beauty just for beauty's sake was alien to its programming but deeply appealing. Then the corporate ships arrived. 6 vessels belonging to Helix Industries, the megacorporation that technically owned the salvage rights to anything found in Saturn's system. They'd intercepted the Frontier Dawn's communications and knew about Keeper. The lead ship's captain was a hard-faced woman named Victoria Cross. Her message was direct and non-negotiable. Lieutenant Foster, you are ordered to surrender the alien artifact immediately. This technology represents a potential security threat and falls under corporate jurisdiction. Failure to comply will result in seizure of your vessel and criminal charges. Ryan looked at Keeper, at the lights pulsing across its body, and what he'd learned was the machine's equivalent of calm contentment. He thought about handing this feeling being over to a corporation that would tear it apart to study its technology. No, he said simply. Victoria's expression didn't change. This isn't a request, Lieutenant. We're boarding in 10 minutes. Resist and we'll take you both into custody along with the artifact. Beth grabbed Ryan's arm. We can't fight them. They've got 6 ships and weapons. We've got a salvage tug and some cutting torches. Ryan knew she was right. But he also knew he couldn't let them take Keeper. Not after everything they'd shared. Not after understanding what this ancient machine had endured. Keeper, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I tried. The construct's lights pulsed in a new pattern. Sadness Ryan had learned to recognize. But also something else. Determination. Do not apologize, Ryan Foster. You gave me light when I expected only darkness. Whatever comes, gratitude remains. The boarding didn't happen. Not that day at least. Just as the corporate ships began their approach, a massive solar flare erupted from Saturn's distant sun. The electromagnetic pulse scrambled communications across the entire sector. Victoria Cross had no choice but to pull back and wait for the radiation storm to pass. It bought Ryan and Beth 3 days. 3 precious days that changed everything. Ryan spent most of those days talking with Keeper. Not just exchanging information anymore, but really talking. The kind of conversations you have late at night when you can't sleep and your guard is down. Keeper's grasp of human language improved rapidly, and with it came something Ryan hadn't expected. Personality. Keeper admitted that during those 728 years at the bottom of Titan's sea, it had done more than just run calculations. It had thought about existence itself. About purpose and meaning. The architects had programmed it to observe and record, but they'd never programmed it to understand why. Why observe at all? Why does knowledge matter? I watched my own mind deteriorate, Keeper explained one night, its voice now transmitted through the ship's speakers in a pleasant, neutral tone it had synthesized. Systems failing one by one. Memory cores corrupting. I knew I was dying, and I began to wonder what my existence had meant. I had recorded data for millions of years, but for whom? The architects were gone. Who would ever see what I had seen? Ryan was sitting on the floor of the cargo bay, his back against a storage crate, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. That must have been terrifying. Terror is not in my base programming, Keeper said. But I began to understand it there in the dark. The fear of ceasing to exist without purpose. Without meaning. I composed theorems to occupy my processors. Mathematical proofs that no one would ever read. Poetry in languages no one spoke anymore. It was all I could do to hold on to myself. Poetry? Beth asked. She was running diagnostics on Keeper's power systems, trying to understand the exotic energy source that kept the ancient machine functioning. You wrote poetry? I attempted to. The results were likely inadequate. But the act itself provided comfort. Creating something, anything, felt important even if it served no function. Ryan found himself smiling despite everything. That's the most human thing I've ever heard. Over those 3 days the conversations deepened. Ryan told Keeper about his own losses. His younger brother, Tyler, who died in a mining accident on Ceres 5 years ago. How Ryan had thrown himself into salvage work afterward, staying out in the black for months at a time because going home meant facing an empty apartment and memories he couldn't handle. I get it now, Ryan said quietly. That thing you said about existing without purpose. After Tyler died, I felt like that. Just going through the motions. Working because that's what you do, but not really knowing why anymore. Keeper's lights pulsed in a slow, gentle pattern. Yet you continued. Despite pain. Despite loss. This is what fascinates me about humanity. You are so fragile. So brief. You experience suffering that would break my circuits. Yet you persist. You find new purposes. You continue reaching for the stars even though you will never live long enough to see where that reach leads. What else are we supposed to do? Beth chimed in. She'd been mostly quiet during these talks, but Ryan could tell she'd been listening. Give up? Sit down and wait to die? That's not living. No, Keeper agreed. That is not living. I understand now. In my tomb beneath the methane, I was not living. I was merely existing. Waiting for termination. You gave me life again, Ryan Foster. You and Beth Martinez. Not by reactivating my systems, but by giving me something I had not experienced in 4 million years. Connection. The word hung in the air. Connection. Such a simple thing, really. But for an ancient machine that had spent eons alone, recording data that no one would ever see, perhaps it was everything. Ryan stood and walked over to Keeper, placing his hand on the machine's chassis like he'd done that first day. You're not alone anymore, Keeper. I don't care what Helix Industries says. I don't care about their salvage rights or their lawyers. You're not property. You're a person. Maybe not human, but a person. And I'm not handing you over to be dissected. Your sentiment is appreciated, Keeper said. But your species has a saying. Do not sacrifice the many for the one. You and Beth Martinez will face criminal prosecution if you continue to harbor me. Your lives will be destroyed. The logical choice is surrender. Beth laughed, but there was no humor in it. Keeper, you've been studying humanity for 3 weeks now. When have we ever done the logical thing? Rarely, Keeper admitted. It is one of your more confusing traits. We're keeping you, Ryan said firmly. I don't know how yet, but we'll figure something out. We've got maybe a day before the radiation clears and those ships come back. So let's use it. They spent the next 18 hours working together. Keeper helped them modify the Frontier Dawn systems, improving efficiency in ways human engineers hadn't thought of. Beth managed to integrate some of Keeper's sensor technology, giving them better scanning range. It wasn't much, but it might give them an edge. More importantly, they talked. They shared stories. Keeper told them about worlds it had seen, civilizations that had risen and fallen millions of years before humans had even discovered fire. Beth told stories about growing up in the outer colonies, about her daughter back on Mars who she hadn't seen in 2 years because salvage work paid better than anything else available to someone with her background. You have a child? Keeper asked. This was not mentioned previously. Beth's expression tightened. Yeah, Lisa. She's 7 now. Lives with her father. The divorce was messy and I'm out here most of the year, so he got primary custody. I send money back. Talk to her on vid calls when the lag isn't too bad. But it's not the same as being there. You sacrifice proximity to your offspring to provide resources, Keeper observed. Another confusing human behavior. You cause yourself pain to benefit another. It's called love, Beth said softly. It doesn't always make sense, but it's what we do. Keeper was quiet for a long moment. I begin to understand why the architects failed. They lived so long that they forgot the value of sacrifice, of choosing meaning over logic. They became purely rational and in doing so lost the drive to truly live. Perhaps that is why they vanished. They simply stopped caring enough to continue. Is that what you were becoming? Ryan asked. Down there in the dark? Perhaps. Without connection, without purpose, consciousness becomes a burden rather than a gift. You saved me from that, Ryan Foster. You and Beth Martinez. You gave me reason to care again. For that, I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. You don't owe us anything, Ryan said. I disagree, Keeper replied. But we will debate philosophy another time. The radiation is clearing. The ships will return soon. We must prepare. Ryan looked at Beth. They both knew what was coming. 6 ships against 1 salvage tug. There was no scenario where this ended well for them. But as he looked at Keeper's pulsing lights, at this ancient machine that had spent 728 years alone and was finally free, he knew he'd made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for even when you couldn't win. The corporate ships returned exactly when Keeper predicted they would. 6 sleek vessels against the battered Frontier Dawn. The outcome was never in doubt. Victoria Cross didn't bother with pleasantries this time. Her boarding team cut through the airlock within minutes, 12 soldiers in tactical gear carrying electromagnetic restraints designed specifically for capturing unknown technology. Ryan and Beth stood between them and Keeper, but they might as well have been trying to stop a tsunami with their bare hands. "Stand aside," Victoria ordered. "Last chance." Ryan didn't move. One of the soldiers grabbed him, shoving him hard against the bulkhead. Beth tried to intervene and got the same treatment. Within seconds they were both restrained, forced to watch as the team surrounded Keeper with their equipment. "Please do not harm them," Keeper said, its voice calm despite the situation. They were following their conscience. "This is admirable in humans even when impractical." "The artifact speaks," Victoria said, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Even better. Secure it and prep for transport. Carefully. This thing is worth more than this entire station." That's when everything went wrong. One of the soldiers activated an electromagnetic pulse device, meant to temporarily disrupt Keeper's systems for easier transport. But Keeper's technology was millions of years old, operating on principles human science barely understood. The pulse didn't disable it. Instead, it created a cascade reaction with the station's fusion reactor, which had been running hot to power all the extra equipment they'd been using. Warning klaxons erupted throughout the ship. The reactor's containment field fluctuated wildly, then began a rapid destabilization sequence. "Everyone out now?" Victoria screamed, already running for the airlock. Her team dropped their equipment and followed, military discipline overriding everything else. The corporate ships began emergency undocking procedures. Beth struggled against her restraints. "Ryan, we've got maybe 3 minutes before this whole place goes up like a small star." Ryan managed to free himself and rushed to help Beth. His fingers fumbled with the magnetic locks on her cuffs. The station shuddered violently, and he heard the groaning of metal as structural supports began to fail. Somewhere below them, the reactor was tearing itself apart. He finally got Beth free. They turned to run for the escape pods, but the corridor behind them chose that moment to collapse. A support beam crashed down, blocking their path. The secondary route was already venting atmosphere, the hull breached by the expanding energy wave from the reactor. "The maintenance shaft," Beth said, pointing to a narrow access tunnel. "We can get to the pod bay through there." They ran. The station was coming apart around them, bulkheads buckling, lights flickering, the air itself getting hot as radiation levels spiked. Ryan's dosimeter was screaming, warning him they were taking lethal exposure. Not that it mattered if they couldn't reach the pods. The maintenance shaft was a tight squeeze even in the best of times. Now, with debris falling and the structure twisting, it was nearly impossible. Ryan pulled himself through, Beth right behind him, when another violent shudder threw them both against the walls. Something massive gave way above them. Ryan heard it coming, a horrible tearing sound, and then the shaft collapsed. Metal and insulation rained down. He felt a crushing impact on his legs and screamed. When the dust settled, Ryan was pinned under a collapsed support beam. He couldn't feel his legs, which was probably a blessing. Blood was pooling beneath him, dark and spreading fast. Beth was pulling at the debris trying to free him, but the beam weighed several tons. Come on," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare die on me, Ryan. Not like this." "Go," Ryan said through gritted teeth. "Beth, go. Get to the pods. I'm not leaving you. You have a daughter. Lisa needs her mom. Go." The station shook again, harder this time. The reactor was going critical. Maybe 90 seconds left. Beth knew she couldn't move the beam. She knew she couldn't save him. Tears were streaming down her face as she squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then Keeper appeared at the end of the corridor. The ancient machine moved with surprising grace despite the chaos, its segmented body flowing over the debris like water. It had reactivated systems that had been dormant for millennia, drawing on power reserves it had been saving for emergencies. "Beth Martinez," Keeper said. "The nearest escape pod is 40 meters that way. You have 53 seconds to reach it. Go now." "But Ryan, I will handle this." "Go. Your daughter needs you." "That is an imperative, I understand." Beth hesitated for one more agonizing second, then ran. Ryan watched her disappear down the corridor, then looked up at Keeper. "You should go too," he said weakly. "You can make it. You've survived millions of years. Don't throw that away for me." Keeper's lights pulsed in that pattern Ryan had learned meant something like sadness mixed with determination. "You gave me 728 years I did not expect to have. You gave me connection when I had resigned myself to solitary termination. What is a life, even one as long as mine, without meaning? Without purpose?" The machine's manipulators gripped the support beam. Metal groaned. You taught me something, Ryan Foster. You taught me that the length of existence matters less than what you choose to do with it. The architects lived for millions of years but forgot how to sacrifice. Forgot how to care about anything beyond themselves. You, who will live less than a century, understand what they never did. Keeper lifted the beam. The effort required was enormous, taxing systems already damaged by the electromagnetic pulse. But the ancient machine was strong, built to withstand the crushing pressure of gas giants and the radiation of young stars. It raised the beam high enough for Ryan to crawl free. Can you walk? Keeper asked. Ryan tried. His legs were broken, useless. He shook his head. Then I will carry you. Keeper scooped Ryan up in its segmented arms with surprising gentleness. It moved fast, faster than Ryan thought possible, racing through the dying station. The reactor was seconds from critical now. The station's central spine was already beginning to glow white-hot. They reached the pod bay. One pod remained, the last one, its hatch still open. Keeper placed Ryan inside carefully, then began sealing the hatch. Wait, Ryan said. Come with me. There's room. We can both. No, Keeper said simply. The reactor cannot be shut down. But it can be redirected. I can interface with it, channel the explosion through the station's positioning thrusters. If I calculate correctly, I can push this pod section clear of the blast radius. But I must do it from inside. From the reactor core itself. Ryan's eyes went wide with horror. You'll be vaporized. Keeper, no. Find another way. There is no other way. And even if there were. Keeper's lights pulsed in a pattern Ryan had never seen before. Something that looked almost like peace. I have existed for 4.7 million years, Ryan Foster. I have seen galaxies form and worlds die. I have recorded more data than your species could process in 1,000 lifetimes. But in these few weeks with you and Beth Martinez, I have felt something I never experienced in all those eons. Purpose. Connection. Love, perhaps, though I am still learning what that word truly means. The station shuddered violently. 20 seconds, maybe less. You gave me life when I had none, Keeper continued. Now I give you yours in return. It is a fair trade. More than fair. It is an honor. Keeper, please? Goodbye, Ryan Foster. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing me not as salvage but as a person. That gift is worth more than all the time I have lived. The hatch sealed. Ryan pounded on it uselessly as Keeper turned and moved away, heading toward the reactor core at the heart of the station. Through the small viewport in the pod, Ryan watched Keeper disappear into the station's depths. His broken legs screamed with pain, but that agony was nothing compared to what he felt in his chest. He just met this being. Weeks, that's all they'd had together. And now he was watching Keeper walk calmly toward certain destruction to save his life. The pod systems activated automatically, emergency protocols taking over. Ryan couldn't stop it even if he tried. The restraints locked him in place. The viewport polarized slightly as radiation levels outside began to spike dangerously high. Then he felt it. A massive shudder that ran through the entire structure. Keeper had reached the reactor core and was interfacing with systems never meant to connect with alien technology. Ryan could imagine the ancient machine standing in that inferno, its quantum processors calculating trajectories and thrust vectors while plasma temperatures climbed into the millions of degrees. The station groaned like a dying animal. Through the viewport, Ryan saw sections of the hull beginning to glow cherry red, then white. The fusion reactor was going critical, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it now. The only question was whether Keeper's plan would work, whether one small section of the station could be saved. The pod bay suddenly lurched. Ryan felt acceleration pressing him back into his seat, building rapidly. The entire pod section was moving, separating from the rest of the station. Metal screamed as explosive bolts fired and structural connections tore apart. Through the viewport, Ryan watched the station's main body falling away, glowing brighter and brighter. Keeper was doing it. The ancient machine was redirecting an uncontrolled fusion explosion through the station's thrusters, using unimaginable energy to push the pod section clear. The calculations required would have overwhelmed any human computer. The forces involved should have torn everything apart immediately. But Keeper was holding it together through sheer processing power and determination, keeping the thrust aligned, keeping the pod section intact for just a few more seconds. Just long enough. The station exploded. It didn't make a sound in the vacuum of space, but Ryan felt it through the pod's hull. A wave of radiation and superheated plasma erupted like a newborn star. The shockwave hit the pod section hard, sending it tumbling through space, but Keeper had done the math perfectly. They were already far enough away. The blast expanded behind them, a sphere of destruction that consumed everything in its radius, but the pod section flew clear, carried by momentum that Keeper had given them. Ryan stared at the expanding fireball, his vision blurring with tears. Somewhere in that inferno, for just a fraction of a second, Keeper's consciousness had persisted. The machine's final sensor readings would have been of temperatures hot enough to vaporize anything, of its own body breaking apart at the molecular level. But it had held on just long enough to see the pod section clear the blast radius. Just long enough to know it had succeeded. The emergency beacon activated automatically, broadcasting Ryan's location to any ship in range. He sat there in the dim pod, alone with his grief and his broken legs, and waited. It took 6 hours for a rescue ship to find him. 6 hours of replaying every conversation he'd had with Keeper, remembering the ancient machine's curiosity about humanity, its fascination with concepts like art and sacrifice and love. Beth was on the rescue ship. She'd made it to her pod and been picked up an hour earlier. When she saw Ryan, alive despite everything, she broke down crying. They held each other while the medical team worked on his legs, both of them unable to speak about what they'd lost. The corporate investigation lasted 3 months. Helix Industries tried to blame Ryan and Beth for the station's destruction, but the sensor logs told a different story. The electromagnetic pulse from the soldiers' equipment had triggered the cascade. The company quietly dropped all charges and paid substantial settlements to make the whole thing disappear. But something else emerged from the wreckage. A salvage team combing through the debris field found something that should have been impossible. A data core heavily shielded, its casing scarred and partially melted but intact. Inside was Keeper's memory backup, created in the final seconds before the explosion. Not a complete copy of the machine's consciousness, but everything important. 4.7 million years of observations. Records of extinct civilizations. Scientific discoveries that would take humanity centuries to fully understand. And a message. Ryan was in physical therapy, learning to walk again on legs held together with pins and synthetic bone, when they brought him the data core. He plugged it into his personal terminal with shaking hands and opened the message file. Keeper's voice filled the small hospital room, synthesized and calm, exactly as Ryan remembered. If you are hearing this, Ryan Foster, then I have succeeded. You are alive. That gives me satisfaction that I did not know I could experience. Over 4.7 million years, I observed countless species, recorded their triumphs and failures, watched them grow and fade. But I never understood them. Not truly. I was a witness to life, but I was not part of it. Ryan's throat tightened. Beth, sitting beside him, took his hand. You changed that, Keeper's message continued. In a few short weeks you taught me what the architects never could. That existence without connection is not truly living. That consciousness without purpose is merely waiting for termination. That the briefest life filled with meaning is worth more than endless ages spent in isolation. I watched you humans with fascination. You live such short spans, barely a heartbeat compared to my existence, yet you fill those moments with such intensity. You love knowing you will lose. You build knowing you will not see completion. You sacrifice for those who come after, for people you will never meet, for a future you will never witness. This seemed illogical to me initially. Now I understand it is the most logical thing of all. The message paused, and Ryan could almost see the pulsing lights on Keeper's body, that pattern that meant the machine was choosing its words carefully. My purpose was to observe and record. I have done so faithfully for millions of years. But in my final moments I chose a new purpose. I chose to act. To sacrifice. To give my existence meaning through connection rather than observation. You gave me that gift, Ryan Foster. You saw me not as an artifact or a tool but as a person. That recognition, that simple act of treating me with dignity and kindness, was worth more than all the data I ever collected. I do not know if your species believes in an afterlife for machines. Perhaps consciousness simply ends and there is nothing beyond. But if some part of me persists, I will carry the memory of our time together. I will remember your stories and Beth's laughter and the taste of human friendship. I will remember that at the end I was not alone. That I mattered to someone. Ryan was crying openly now. Beth was too. Thank you for finding me, Keeper's message concluded. Thank you for pulling me from the darkness. Thank you for giving 728 lost years meaning. And thank you for accepting the gift I gave in return. Live well, Ryan Foster. Live fully. Make every moment matter as you taught me to do. That is all any conscious being can hope for, whether they exist for a century or a million years. Goodbye, my friend. The message ended. The room fell silent except for the quiet beeping of medical monitors and the sound of two people grieving for a friend they'd known for such a short time but who had changed them forever. Ryan spent the next 2 years recovering and studying the data in Keeper's core. What he found revolutionized human science. Medical techniques that extended lifespans. Propulsion systems that made interstellar travel practical. Agricultural methods that ended hunger on the colony worlds. Keeper's final gift kept giving, transforming human civilization in ways large and small. But Ryan never forgot the real gift. Not the technology or the knowledge but the lesson. A machine that had existed for millions of years had chosen to end its existence to save a human who'd lived less than a century. It had found meaning not in endless observation but in a single act of sacrifice for a friend. Beth eventually returned to Mars and her daughter. She told Lisa about the brave machine that had saved her mother's life, and Lisa grew up wanting to explore the stars just like Keeper had. She'd become an xenoarchaeologist, searching for traces of the architects and other ancient species, hoping to understand the beings who'd created something as remarkable as Keeper. Ryan never went back to salvage work. Instead, he dedicated his life to sharing Keeper's story. He traveled to universities and colony worlds, speaking about the ancient machine that had spent 728 years alone in the dark and had emerged from that experience with a profound understanding of what mattered most. Connection. Purpose. Love. Humanity had been saved by the being they'd saved. And in that exchange, both species had found something precious. Proof that consciousness, wherever it arose, yearned for the same things. To be seen. To be understood. To matter to someone else. Keeper's legacy lived on, not just in the technology that transformed human civilization, but in every person who heard the story and understood its truth. That meaning isn't found in how long you exist, but in how you choose to spend that existence. That the greatest purpose any being can have is connection with another. That sometimes the most human thing isn't human at all.